Not met, my name is Glenn Hetker. I'm the MBS Foundation Chair and Professor of Strategy at Melbourne Business School, where I also founded and direct our Center for Sustainability in Business, and have the great pleasure of teaching some of our guests here today a session on strategic partnerships, strategic alliances. And given that background, we really could think of no more a wonderful guest speaker to have join us than Ms. Rebecca Hall, who is Commissioner for Victoria in Southeast Asia with Victoria Global Trade and Investment. And we'll take about 45 minutes as a fireside conversation with myself and Rebecca, and then we will then open for 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. And because I've actually asked if Rebecca would take about 5 minutes to share her biography, because I think it actually speaks very much to what we're trying to accomplish together. I will not introduce her at any more length, but rather let me turn it over to Rebecca. And could you share a little bit about your biography and what brought you to your current position, please?
Sure. Good morning, Glenn and colleagues. It's my absolute pleasure to be joining you as part of this fireside conversation. I'm coming to you today from Melbourne, where I've just spent going on 7 days now back in Melbourne, because as the Commissioner for Victoria to Southeast Asia, my home would usually be anywhere between our 4 offices in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, or Vietnam. So I'm delighted to be back in Melbourne. By way of introduction, I've been very fortunate to have international business and international education as a theme and a core area of my career over the past 25 years or so. And coming to this role, this is a role I started in September 2020. So cast your mind back to September 2020. I changed roles and also took on a global posting and a trade investment role during COVID. So to say it's been challenging is probably an understatement, but it's also been so rewarding to be literally at the coalface with our partners, with our exporters, our partners in Malaysia and in Sarawak as well, in terms of trying to navigate how we work through this. If I spend just one more minute, Glenn, I guess going back to how I came to be in this position, I've been very fortunate to spend most of my career in state government. But I have also started my career in local government with local council in Queensland, spent some time with the federal government, and I think importantly, helping me be a more rounded public servant, have also worked in education and with peak bodies. As I said, my theme in my career has always been around economic development and global engagement. So this is, I guess today's opportunity is an example of all of those areas coming together, talking to the civil service and many of you from Sarawak provincial government, also partnering with the Melbourne Business School as well from an education perspective. And hopefully I'll share some things that are of interest today, and also looking forward to your questions and learning from you as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Could you give us a little bit of an overview of what Victoria Global Trade and Industry, in which you're embedded in work, what it does? Sure.
Yeah, happy to do so. And given I'm talking to a government audience, I will also give you some insights in terms of how we're structured as well. So, and my colleague Cassie will be driving a presentation deck as well, just so you can see a little bit more about why we exist. But I am one of 7 commissioners for Victoria around the globe, and this was an initiative and leadership from the Victorian government over more than 2 decades to prioritise a trade and investment program that works in partnership with the Australian government but recognises the unique economic development needs and the opportunities that trade and investment can offer to growth and prosperity in our state. This is my second time working for Victorian government as well, so it's actually very good to have worked before onshore here in Melbourne and now to be representing the state offshore. So the team and the region that I oversee is Southeast Asia. And some of you from the Sarawak government may have worked with us previously in the region, because Malaysia is our oldest office in Southeast Asia. But I'm now overseeing, as you can see on this map, 4 individual offices, which are all foreign registered offices within Vietnam, Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia. So prior to COVID, that didn't seem like a challenging thing. It has been quite challenging managing 4 offices remotely for more than 18 months. So for us, this region and the reason why we've invested in the network and in the commitment in Southeast Asia is that when you combine Southeast Asia, it's our second largest trading partner for Victoria. When you combine the region as well on a global stage, we're looking at the 5th largest economy on the globe. And we can also see significant opportunity in terms of rising middle class, rising aspirations in the region, and an opportunity for Victorian products and services to be part of that growth. Excuse me, I guess it goes without saying, given what's happening in terms of the world order at the moment, geopolitical tensions, I would say I feel very fortunate to be working in Southeast Asia and in a region where there is so much opportunity for us to collaborate and learn from each other. I'll go to the next slide. Sorry, I do have a little cough still, so I apologise for that. I'll go to the next slide, which is much more specific around our partnership or the opportunity between Victoria and Malaysia. So when we look at Malaysia specifically, Malaysia is our 8th largest trading partner and very historically important to Victoria and to Melbourne, particularly around the movement of students from the early days of Colombo Plan, now under new Colombo Plan, very significant two-way student movement, and of course the investment of our institutions in country as partners for education and productivity. And interestingly, you may be aware of this, but when we compare ourselves to other states, we're also home to Australia's largest Malaysian-born community. So the opportunity for us to build on the diaspora and to continue to connect through trade, investment, and education. I'll go to the next slide, which really just shows you in terms of our footprint. And by that, I mean our people, those who are driving our engagement in the region. Very fortunate to have a strong team. As I said, we work very closely with the Australian government as well. But our overall responsibility is to grow trade, investment, education, and government and strategic partnerships in the region. So this kind of conversation, as much as I would jump at doing it anyway, it's also part of our strategic engagement to be able to be learning from government partners in the region and identifying opportunities for engagement. I realised on that slide, I'm also letting you know that we need our next Deputy Commissioner for Southeast Asia, which I probably should change because we have just finished that process. Yeah, I think I'll finish on our clients, because I think this gives a sense of who we're working with and how we work, particularly on the trade side. So these are a whole lot of logos, but very important manufacturers, brands, and partners that we work with. And during COVID, we really needed to change the way that we worked with our exporters. Traditionally, we had a lot of trade missions, face-to-face meetings, buying missions back to Victoria. And as you well know, that has not been possible for going on 2 years now. So really, for us, it was using that previous slide, our people and their knowledge and their networks on the ground to support our Victorian exporters. And I guess going back to that macro number as well, to make sure that, you know, our trade and investment relationship with Malaysia can grow, that we can meet the buying needs or the consumer needs in market, and hopefully through the process create some win-wins on both sides as well. I don't have the inbound or the import data, but of course Malaysia is also a key two-way trading partner for Victoria as well, and we work with our counterpart at a national level within Malaysian government on those activities as well. So Glenn, hopefully that's a bit of a context on what we do and sets the scene for our chat.
It does wonderfully. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Wanted to just talk about 2 or 3 specific examples of collaborative projects you have going on, because our big focus, of course, is that collaboration between government and for-purpose, the for-profit, the community sectors. And you suggested a really fascinating range of activities that the center that you are supporting. Let me start by asking you about the Study Melbourne International Research Partnership Program. Can you tell us a little bit about its purposes and who's involved?
Sure. Actually, Glenn, I realised maybe I'll just take it one level up in terms of how strategic partnerships and alliances have been so important during COVID, and for
Perfect.
a new commissioner as well.
Perfect.
Because, you know, coming into this role, not being able to get on a plane, visit our partners in person, also not being able to do what we always did. You know, we had to create new products and new services. So strategic alliances and partnerships were critical to that. And the example that you've given there, the Study Melbourne Research Partnership Program, was an example of, you know, we were unable to create those research linkages by, you know, researchers traveling the region, connecting with their counterparts. And we wanted to move into a space that we hadn't been active in before. To give context, Study Melbourne is our partnership with the Victorian education institutions. So Study Melbourne is both a brand but a partnership. And that means we work in concert with our universities, our TAFE colleges, our schools, our regulators to identify opportunities for education in the region. So I guess this strategic partnership that I'm going to talk about in terms of the research program was able to be delivered so quickly and during COVID because we have a relationship with those institutions, a much broader relationship. We hadn't really, until now, focused on the research component. We were very much more involved in the partnerships, commercial partnerships, and, you know, some student recruitment and two-way movement. So as part of our international education short-term recovery plan, we were able to secure some funds from government, which were very tactical and designed to grow market access and strengthen our reputation in key research areas and also in EdTech. So it was a very, of course, with many strategic partnerships or alliances with government, you need to have some glue money. You need to have some ways to bring the collaboration together and incentivize that collaboration. We also recognise that we weren't trying to compete with big research grants or deep technical research programs. We really wanted to touch on what was missing, which was those going to your specific industry conferences and connecting with a researcher from overseas, or you know, on your sabbaticals and connecting with researchers. So the program was global. In Southeast Asia, we have a couple of the research projects funded, one in Vietnam and one in Indonesia. And the second stream of this partnership was also around EdTech. So I think education technology has, obviously been an important part of Victoria's economy for many years. We are actually the home of EdTech in Australia, but of course, during COVID, we had to incentivise and create new ways of working. And so the second part of the partnership was around EdTech, and particularly looking how we could build capability in our industry partner, EduGrowth. So that partnership was directly funding our think tank and our accelerator for EdTech, but specifically had to bring together three parties to collaborate. So again, that common theme, a small amount of glue money to incentivise industry, government, and education to work together.
And were the partnerships entirely within Victoria reaching out, or did you also build relationships with international partners?
Of course, yes, I missed that most important part, Glenn. Absolutely. It was every one of those had to have an international partner involved in the project. So even if you had the best technology and the best concept, it was only funded if you had identified an international partner. So in EdTech, that was often a school or a test bed where you could test your EdTech technology. And in the research component, that was direct institution to institution or academic to academic. I think the interesting model there, though, Glenn, in both of those was we partnered with an intermediary. We partnered with EduGrowth and we partnered with Vesky in order to stand up the projects quite quickly as well, and also to make sure that we really got the highest quality partnerships.
And what you talked about the outcome for the intermediaries. What were they, above and beyond obviously the contract, what were they able to accomplish by working with you and their overseas partners?
Great question. And we're still in the middle of these projects, so we're still doing full assessment. But I think for both of those organisations, for EduGrowth and for Vesky, it actually gave them the opportunity to look outside. They were very focused on domestic priorities, and I think it would have taken them another 12 months or longer to move to internationally facing opportunities. So I think we accelerated their return to international partnership faster than they would have done on their own. I think we have solidified their position as go-to partners. And anecdotally, they've definitely told us that it's opened up more opportunities. And for both of the projects, we're not going to be able to know this for a couple of years, but obviously there are underpinning outcomes from each of the projects in terms of the delivery models, the research that's coming out of the research partnership. So you've got that whole kind of cascading flow from the partnership.
That's really interesting. And one of the things we've been talking about is that challenge of selecting the right partners. And it sounds like the approach in this case you took to it was relying on intermediaries and on your local partners to leverage their connections and expertise to select the partners overseas. Is that correct?
It is correct, but actually a good reminder as well, because as a government, we have the Victorian Government Trade and Investment Network, and our offices in the region are 4 of 23 around the world. We were also tasked to work on behalf of our institutions and those intermediaries to find appropriate partners in the region. So whilst we couldn't promise, we certainly tried to bring the best partners and those that were ready to engage. And we had no role in selecting the partners. So we could do it as a true independent partner because we weren't involved in the selection process.
Fantastic. That neutral helper can be so critical.
Yeah.
So as a point of contrast, can you share a little bit with us, please, about the Global Trade Alliance program?
Sure. Yeah. When I think about the Global Trade Alliance and just the way we directed the questions then, Glenn, one of the things that I think is unique about Victoria's approach to trade and investment is that we've actually built an ecosystem around us. So we know we have an important role as government, but we know that government can't do everything and is not always the right party to lead or deliver. So building an ecosystem has been a hallmark, I think, of how Victorian government has led on industry policy for more than two decades. What we were able to do with the Global Trade Alliance was something that was informal and tacit before COVID, and we formalized it in a way that was relevant to the COVID context. So again, during COVID, we were fortunate that the Victorian government, number one, as many in the audience will know, definitely put health first in terms of prioritising COVID and managing under COVID. And it meant that we did get some global recognition that we didn't really want, like, longest lockdown city, but actually government made two key investments, one around health, but the second then around recovery. And our ministers, our premier, were very committed that we had to ensure a trade-led recovery. So the Global Trade Alliance program was actually normally, as you saw on my earlier slide, we partner very closely with individual businesses, and we still do that. But what we did under the Global Trade Alliance was actually bring together those groups, those chambers of commerce. Use a prime example here, the Malaysia-Australia Chamber of Commerce, the Australia-Malaysia Business Council, bringing them in to partner with us to deliver insight and knowledge. Because if anyone was operating in trade during COVID and said they knew definitively what was happening with supply chains, how consumer demand was changing, and how they were going to build their next quarter or their next year's business, I don't think they were being honest, because really, whole supply chains have been redefined, whole ways of selling and distributing products have changed. So through this alliance, we actually had, it was only about 4.7 million. So it was, in terms of our overall trade program, significant, but also manageable. And we were able to create partnership agreements with 29 international chambers of commerce, peak bodies, and business associations. And it was that multiplier effect of being able to direct those associations who we already knew well and had positive relationships with, but we were really able to accelerate that and turn that into hopefully more knowledge and information for our exporters, but also growing those companies that moved to exports or wanted to move to exports during COVID. So in Southeast Asia, we mirrored that within the VGTI. So we were also able to partner with the in-country representation, like, as I said, Malaysia Australia Business Council, AusCham Thailand, AusCham Singapore, Indonesia Australia Business Council, AusCham Vietnam, and the Australia New Zealand Chamber in the Philippines. And I know you would think as a trade agency, why didn't we do this sooner? They were informal relationships that during COVID, and because of the power of partnership, we wanted to formalise and incentivise.
And that's such a great observation, that those pre-existing relationships are such a good investment, because they're there when you need them to step up. Did you achieve what you had hoped to achieve with that partnership?
Yeah, great question. So there was quite a lot of metrics and KPIs around that partnership, and I think at the outset, the overarching goal was engagement. So from an engagement measure, how many businesses and how many of those associations signed up and engaged, and it was beyond our expectation. We've reached thousands of individual businesses through the partnership, and we've shared a lot of content and market insight. So that's definitely a tick at the top level. I think longer term, and because this was a short-term arrangement, and in government policy perspective as well, it's not something necessarily that we will year on year have this amount of money to invest in. So for us, it was also about going, how do we understand the chamber more, or that partner more, so that we can naturally partner again without the money, without the incentive. So I think that will be the ultimate test as well. Did we understand each other better to be able to collaborate even without incentive moving forward.
And you got exactly to my next question, the sort of where does it go next? And it sounds like we'll discover that together. If I can add a third example, just so we've got a couple to work with here on the table, you mentioned Enterprise SG. Can you say a little bit about that? Enterprise Singapore, a little more about that, please?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, during COVID, I was based predominantly in Singapore, and we've had an office in Singapore for going on 3 years now. And we're a sub-national trade and investment agency. So we work with both, and in Singapore, we're talking about a city-state as well, so one level of government to engage with. But we found that when I looked at the 4 components of our team, so our trade focus, our investment focus, education, and government partnerships, every one of my team was working with Enterprise Singapore in a different way. Every one of my team had their relationship at the operational level. And what we decided to formalise during COVID and was met with excitement and interest from Enterprise Singapore, which is just in terms of context, Enterprise Singapore is Singapore's agency that assists their companies to build capabilities, innovate, and internationalise. So we actually have a similar goal in that in Enterprise Singapore wanting to encourage their companies to internationalise, well, we want them to look to us. We want them to look to Victoria. So what we did was we had our first meetings. This was quite quick as well. We had a relationship, but as a new commissioner, I hadn't met the CEO of Enterprise Singapore. We hadn't pitched this in, but from our first meeting, it was clear that we could both see the opportunities to do things a little bit more strategically. So we signed our first action plan with Enterprise Singapore, and the framework then let us really give permission for our teams to work more strategically on the different areas that we had prioritised, and also to go into deeper thinking around, and this is where the understanding the partner is so important, for both of us to put on the table what were the industry areas that we were focused on. And one of the examples that's in the action plan is food security. We know food security is a top priority for Singapore. We know that Victoria is an exporter. More than 30% of our products are exported. In some markets, the Australian product is more than 70% from Victoria: dairy, meat, horticulture. So, and also that we have expertise in food tech and ag tech. So when we heard from Enterprise Singapore, this is a priority, great, it got on the action plan. We could also add our priorities around health and med tech. So I guess the reason why I wanted to share this one as an example, Glenn, is that it happened quite quickly, and it's really given us a good framework to work through and to hold our teams to account in terms of delivery. And it's not a government MOU. It's not a formal kind of sign and put on the shelf. It's a tactical and dynamic plan and process. So I look forward to getting back to Singapore in a couple of weeks and doing our first annual review of the plan.
Well, and that's fascinating in that it's not an MOU. Does it have a formal structure, or is it just developed across the relationships?
Just developed across relationships. Not to bore this group, but there is, I guess there are extra layers in Australia at the moment in terms of partnerships or formal legal agreements with foreign governments. And so we certainly, we weren't interested in moving through a formal MOU or process that would be part of the Foreign Relations Act. We really wanted to keep it quite tactical and use it as a way to understand each other and use it as a way to prioritise our limited resources as well.
Fantastic. Well, so we've got those 3 examples there. With reference to those or any other reference that seems appropriate to you, what are the biggest challenges you see in collaboration, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah. Wow, where do I start with the biggest challenges? I think I just touched on one, which is not a challenge for us in the region, but the changing legislative environment on both sides when you're doing bilateral, multilateral or trilateral partnerships is really understanding the legislative environment that you're entering into, and making sure that we're complying with the relevant laws. So I mentioned the Foreign Relations Act, which is a new way of working for us here in Australia. And we in the region are advancing some partnerships under that act, but we're also aware that we can get things done in different, more tactical ways. So first is I'd say that legislative environment and the authorising environment as well for, I mentioned in my intro, I've worked in international engagement for more than 25 years. And, you know, there can be some negative views of city or state agreements that are signed by a certain leader and then not implemented, or are, you know, blank or hollow documents as well. So I think the challenge is making sure that we acknowledge the ceremonial and the importance of the agreements, but that we also back them in with resources. So I think resourcing would be the second challenge, and getting continuation of that resourcing. I'm not sure about colleagues in Sarawak and in the civil service there, but we have had a huge turnover of staff during COVID. The Victorian economy itself, our education institutions, we have seen huge turnover, people exiting for new roles, people choosing to be part of Great Resignation, whatever it might be. So I don't just mean resourcing in terms of number of people, I mean the ongoing thought leadership, partnership and understanding of, you know, where the partnership came from and where you want to go. So both resourcing and understanding of the partnership. I think finally, recognising the intercultural elements of getting to partnership, the requirements around not just the negotiation, so negotiation, delivery and evaluation. And aside from the legal context or the people to work on it, if we don't have strong intercultural global competence skills, and I've seen this happen, unfortunately, either at not our government, but, you know, either at the government level or at the provider level, where we really crucially misstep because we don't understand the value of relationships or the value of the hierarchy in the organisation that we're working with. So that intercultural competency and making sure that spreads across your whole organisation, from your lowest to your highest and other ways, and continuing to invest in that as well, that it is it's a muscle and it's a way of thinking that we need to keep investing in as well.
So when you say investing in, because this is so critical, and I'm glad you pointed out that you need it from the top to the bottom. How do you build it? How have you been successful in building with your teams? Yeah.
Actually, during COVID, we've mandated a new course for all of our internal teams. So we've all, as part of induction for new team members, included a global competence certificate. Now, all of our team members have been working in cross-cultural and intercultural environments, but we just thought it was a really important kind of stop and check. And the global competence certificate is actually a nice little product itself. We also found for our team, because of COVID, our teams used to work as a lot more siloed. You know, the Malaysia team, the Indonesia team, the Singapore team. So even the intercultural and cross-cultural context across our teams and how we got stuff done. So one was investing in formal opportunities for training. I think the other was stopping, and this is a continual improvement piece as well, stopping to check our decision-making processes. I can say during COVID, because of the challenges that governments were under, whether they were managing quarantine or COVID outbreaks or other areas, we actually we've had to review our decision-making process. And I'm talking about this from the Australian side. But actually making sure that you check that when you've changed your, you know, whatever your internal decision-making or process is, actually making sure that that works for your international engagement. And so we've been really mindful on trying to be a partner inside our agency and for other Victorian government agencies to make sure that that decision-making process and that communication process recognises that even though you're not getting on planes, or even though it might not feel like you are globally connected, we are inherently globally connected. So let's get this right now, and let's invest in it, which is the point that I started at. And then finally, I think just on that investment is our education institutions, and Melbourne University and Melbourne Business School is a great example of that. We've seen tremendous innovation during COVID of being able to share knowledge and insight and skills in a way that wasn't possible beforehand. So we as a government and my team, we've lent on the innovation of our educational institutions and our partners to also bring us into new ways of thinking, new ways of working, and apply that in our offices.
That's great to hear about. Really, that internal focus on how do you be a good partner is so important. So let me visit sort of one of the things you mentioned earlier, and that is that challenge we have when we work in government, in that we have turnover at so many levels. And when it's a change of government, it can be such a steep change in priorities and approach, et cetera. How do you build long-term cooperation in that context?
Yeah. How do you? Well, I think you build good systems to back you up, so you're not reliant on the individual or the personality. So you build systems behind them. And actually, Raymond from my team, who's on this call, knows this very well, because he has been with us for many years, and he is the holder of much of our knowledge of systems and process. So actually, during COVID, we invested in documenting, recording, and improving our systems to protect us from any of those changes. I think the second part about building collaboration is, and I spoke about this in my career actually, having started in local government, state government, federal government, back to state government, out to universities, out to creating these alliances means that there are people who understand us, and when they may get the opportunity to come and work for us. We've actually had quite a lot of people from Victoria's education institutions come and work inside government during COVID because we had such a surge. The better they understand you as a partner and outside, the more open they are to coming in and having a career or a time in government. So I think that opportunity actually, and we have been very open to secondments as well from industry partners and industry groups as well, to be able to move that knowledge around, whether you're in the public service this year or out with an industry body or an industry partner next year, and moving that knowledge around. So probably those two examples.
Fantastic. So thinking about Victoria, I mean, I think Victoria was an early mover, but I think if you look broadly, you see governments are state governments in many countries are taking a larger role in terms of global collaboration instead of leaving it to the national level.
Yes.
Why is that happening? And what does that, as we think about our audience today, what's that imply for state governments in terms of how you think about structuring global collaboration?
Yeah. Really great question. And I don't have the exact year or the date that we set up our trade and investment networks, but it was certainly at a point in time in Australia's growth and in Australia's diversification of our export products and our desire to attract foreign direct investment, that there was a move from, yes, we've had a strong, long and proud history of Austrade and our Australian Government Trade Agency, but at that time, states and territories at varying stages identified, actually, this is core to our growth, to our prosperity, and to our people. And we want to have more investment in it. Now, from time to time, that becomes a bit contentious as well. But actually, for the most part, it's about Team Australia and adding value in terms of the role that the Australian government can play and what we know our future economic roadmap is. And therefore, we know the types of industries, exporters, and investors that we want to be part of our economic story. So for us, Victorian economy is a significant driver of the Australian economy. And so naturally, we would want to make sure that our economy is humming and that we can manage the value that we get from export, because you might know the numbers better than I do, but 1 in 5 jobs in Australia are created by export from exporters. So it makes sense. Governments are interested in making sure that their people and their economies work, and so having an export sector in terms of being able to contribute to 1 in 5 jobs is very important. The flip side as well, and this is more important in a post-COVID world, being able to attract the kind of investment that you want, often the transformative investment that can change industries and outcomes. And some of the audience may know Victoria's history as Australia's automotive centre and manufacturing centre. And we as a state went through a very challenging transition time. But we owned that. Of course, the Australian government had a role in that, but we owned that and supported that as a state in terms of industry transition is not just for the private sector to determine the outcome. We wanted to play a role in shaping and directing that future industry. And what we've seen now, because of our trade and investment program, our advanced manufacturing, which was built off the back of that industry that had such transition and such change, we're now able to shape that in terms of future industries and future investment in advanced manufacturing in health and biotech, or in space, or in nanotechnology or other areas as well. So when you compare us to other states as well, I guess your question there is to why are state governments investing in this. Every state government in Australia has a trade and investment agency. We as agencies work together on cooperative Commonwealth state partnerships as well. So there absolutely is a partnership, but there's also an understanding of the uniqueness or the unique characteristics of each state and how that plays into how we represent ourselves around the world. I think increasingly, and this is a bit of a different angle, but it's the recognition of global cities for talent and global cities to attract that. So obviously with Melbourne as our capital city, it's also, whilst the Australian government will promote all of Australia, it's our responsibility to promote our destinations and to build our cities that are places that people want to come and engage in. And obviously we can't wait to see and have seen a lot of visitors coming back to Melbourne now that borders are open.
Wait, fantastic. Thank you. And as a state agency, when you're working abroad, are you working primarily with national counterparts, or do you also work with state level counterparts in Malaysia, et cetera?
Fantastic question, Glenn. You just broke up a little bit there, so hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes.
She says coughing, sorry. So yes, we absolutely do work with state counterparts. Very excited to see the announcement. Actually, I think there was a Sarawak government announcement around hydrogen and a partnership with one of our other education institutions. So often our partnerships at the state level are actually driven by our education institutions, and also because of the investment of Victorian universities in transnational campuses, which is going on more than 2 decades. for us in Malaysia, and the importance of Sarawak as both a host of one of our longest serving and most successful transnational partnerships with Swinburne, but also around the complementarity of our industry opportunities. So I think it's an area that I know we've explored periodically. Perhaps the topic of this very fireside chat, Glenn, is a good reminder or a good opportunity around how we might want to go deeper in understanding what the partnership opportunities are between Victoria and Victorian government agencies with the Sarawak Civil Service as well.
Absolutely, and we certainly hope. One of the things that we always discover, of course, is when you bring people together to talk, you find potential out there that you wouldn't have found otherwise. For my last question, before we turn it over to the Q&A, if you had one big takeaway for a senior audience such as we have today, in terms of the power and perils of collaboration, what would that big takeaway be from your experience?
Wow. I know I was meant to be pre-prepared for this, but now I'm thinking about one big takeaway. I think I've got 5 takeaways. So
we'll do 5.
One. No. Actually, I'll start with one big takeaway because it's quite it's not something I would have said pre-COVID. And I've had to learn this the hard way as well, which I think the adage of even though you want to move fast and solve problems fast, you don't always need to go fast, if that makes sense. So, and I think that's where partnership and strategic alliances are so important. So it's recognizing that good collaboration takes time, takes understanding, and takes finding that sweet spot of the win-win-win. And so rushing to a deliverable or an outcome or a something. And we had to do a lot of rushing during COVID. So I think this was also that kind of the reminder of, yes, there are those times when it's a quick move and you're doing the deal and you're solving the problem. But actually, because, for us in my role, we're not going anywhere. We're committed to Southeast Asia. We have the resources, we have the opportunity. So take that time, resource and understand the partnership well on both sides, not just your own side. And then talking about that win-win-win is actually about understanding what does success look like. And oftentimes in the partnership, success will look like different things to different partners, and that's okay as long as you know and understand what that success looks like.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. At this point, I'd like to open it to the floor for Q&A. And our hosts have a Q&A session, but have also suggested that people can turn on video and audio to ask. So let me just open the floor for questions. Do we have anything in the Q&A box?
Not yet, Glenn.
Okay. Let me drop one to get things started. We are moving into a post-COVID world. How's that change? What do you hope to be seeing as we move into that post-COVID world? What changes?
Yeah, great question. I hope to see that we don't lose the innovation and the solutions that were created during COVID. And I'll use education as an example. We saw significant shifts to innovative and creative ways of working, teaching and learning in education, in health, in core areas that are actually very hard to change and shift and disrupt. And we did it quite quickly. We didn't necessarily do it perfectly, but we did it quite quickly. So what I would love to see post-COVID world is how we maintain the good and the innovation that came from that. I would like to, and it's my area as well, I would like to see continued open trade and recognition of the value of trade and open economies and a strong free trade environment. So may not be news there in Malaysia, but big news here in Australia was Australia and India signing the first version of what we call a free trade agreement. Our Indian colleagues give it a different name, but we would, and in Southeast Asia and in ASEAN, of course, strong free trade framework for us to build on. So I would love to see, remaining, keeping the innovation and doubling down on the innovation, and also keeping an open trade system. And just on a personal level for Southeast Asia, I would love to see us do more that brings people together, particularly an area that's very important to us in global Victoria. And for me, as actually the first female commissioner for Victoria to Southeast Asia, is our focus on women and how we support gender equality and gender equity. And it's been a very big focus for Victorian government from a policy perspective, but also we've been able to bring it into our trade agenda as well. And we know that women, sorry, Glenn, we know that women were absolutely disproportionately impacted during COVID in terms of lives and livelihoods, and pressures on women in supporting children out of school in other challenging ways.
Fantastic. And yeah, that balance of the technology, but getting people back in touch face to face, I think is such an important opportunity. We have a question in the discussion. Congratulations on the link with Indonesian Bukalapak, an Indonesian tech giant, to come to Australia. Can you say anything about how that partnership formed, and perhaps more generally, how do you facilitate in a sometimes sensitive relationship between two countries? And were there any success factors or lessons that we could take away from that experience?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you so much. And it was actually, as a new commissioner, it was one of the first investment deals from Indonesia that I started from start to finish. So as you may know, any of you who are working in trade and investment is actually quite a long pipeline. Making a commitment to investing or opening a hub in another country is not something that you take lightly. And of course, Bukalapak with their focus and their growth as well. So I will tell you a little story about that actually. Willix, who is now the CEO of Bukalapak, happens to be a graduate of Melbourne University out of the engineering school. And it was actually through, so we had known Willix, we had known Bukalapak. We'd been speaking to them for many years, proud of Willix and a number of the Bukalapak executive who had been educated in Victoria. And it was kind of at the height of COVID where Willix and I were invited to be on a panel talking about youth entrepreneurship and youth leadership. So it wasn't a hard-hitting, let's go in and do business. It was a conversation around a topic that we were both passionate about. We saw different sides of it. And after that call, and when he presented and I learned a bit more about where Bukalapak was up to, I said to the team, now is the time to engage. So after that call and our first informal catch-up, we engaged our Invest Victoria team, and Invest Victoria does have a number of resources and services at their disposal to support investors who want to come to Victoria. And using my own advice from earlier on around partnership, we actually really just took time to understand what Bukalapak's problems were. What were the problems that they were facing in terms of their growth? Everyone knew that they are a unicorn, that they were about to list on the stock exchange. Everyone in Indonesia certainly knows what they do and how they make a difference to day-to-day transactions. But we needed to understand what would the Melbourne hub solve for their business. So not just, hey, we're Melbourne and we might have some incentives to encourage you to come here, but what is the problem? And the number one problem that they have, and many of our tech companies have in Southeast Asia around the world, is access to talent. And so we really doubled down on how we could create a talent pipeline and a talent partnership for them. We were also super conscious. I mentioned free trade agreements. We were, of course, delighted that IA-SEPA free trade agreement was signed during COVID. And we're really committed as a state to model the aspirations in that free trade agreement, which is about growing two-way trade and investment. So we also saw this as a model partnership. We knew that if we could deliver the skills and talent that Bukalapak needed, bring them into our ecosystem. So I spoke about how we've invested a lot in the ecosystem, bring them into the Victorian ecosystem. Excuse me, then we would have a viable proposition for them to say, yes, this is something that we want to partner with you on. So the result is a what they call and we call a tech hub here in Melbourne, with a commitment to 65 roles. A lot of those connected directly to university graduates and university talent, and that this wasn't about taking anything away from Indonesia or the skills and talent that were needed there. It was adding value to that. Sorry, that was a long answer, Glenn, but you can tell I'm really passionate about Bukalapak.
That's fantastic and exceptionally helpful. I have a follow-up, but let me actually open it to the floor and see if anyone else would like to have a last question, conscious of time here.
Yes, Glenn.
Michael, please.
Yeah, Rebecca. Morning.
Hello, Michael. Good morning.
Yeah, I would like to know, do you have, what do you call it, a specific tools or mechanism? How do you want to evaluate the partnerships?
Yep. For investment partnerships or for any partnerships?
One will do.
Yeah, I think broadly.
Broadly, yes. Well, interesting. I think we have some natural principles that we would apply within the VGTI, but oftentimes for us, because the partnership is often funded or under a different program, a lot of our programs have specific, criteria or success factors. So if I use investment as an example, the success factor for partnership in investment is, are we creating new innovation? Are we creating something that didn't exist by partnering together? And will this add value to our ecosystem? So I think they're two, the old investment partnership, or I don't even think it was seen as a partnership. The old investment model was how much capital investment and how many jobs. Whereas we're actually thinking a bit differently around, is this new innovation and something that we couldn't create on our own? And then what's the value add to the ecosystem that will also hopefully extend and grow that? A lot of the partnerships from us in the region, for me, it's about, will this give us new information and insight that we wouldn't have on our own? And I do have to ask the hard question of, can I resource it? Because I actually don't want to enter into a partnership if I can't resource it. So those two are kind of like the framework, that the top two things that I would approach a partnership. But then most of them, because of the way we work as government, will then have a second layer informed by, the funding program or the sponsorship agreement or whatever it may be. Hopefully that helps and answers your question, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for a really insightful hour. It's been great to hear from your viewpoint and your experience, and get a sense of what one state is doing. If people would like to contact or follow up, how can they do so?
Absolutely, we would love to hear from anyone on the call. We've also got Raymond Peters and Cassie Tam on the call as well. So Raymond is our head and manager of Government and Strategic Partnerships. I'm not sure if they've got their cameras on because I'm having trouble seeing everyone. And Cassie is our lead for Education Services. So they're both there in KL. And you can contact them directly. We can put the contacts in the chat or with you afterwards, Glenn. And of course, I'm more than happy to talk to any colleagues. I am on LinkedIn. That's an easy way for us to stay connected. And we do have our own Victorian Government Southeast Asia channel on LinkedIn as well, where we'll often share news of what's happening in the region, key announcements and opportunities, and easy way to keep up to date with what's happening on our side.
Fantastic. With that, would everyone please join me in thanking Rebecca for her time and insights. Thank you, Cassie and Raymond, for your wonderful support. Thank you to the Leadership Institute for hosting us. Thank you to everyone who joined us. It has been a pleasure, and I hope we have started many conversations. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Great
you,
to see
Rebecca.
you
Thank you,
all.
Glenn. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Glenn. See you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Okay, thank you.